When discussing the African American female experience in America, there are a variety of factors and things that you can use to study this phenomenon. So with this general paper slash presentation, we'll be focusing on is examples from the television show Scandal as well as the novel Sally Hemings. And so with each artifact and example used, we will contextualize these events and provide an analysis based on the feminist critique model. So the first example is from the book Sally Hemings, the story of a woman who was a slave who lived with Thomas Jefferson and had an affair with him and had a relationship with him as a mixed race house slave. And we'll be talking about their relationship and what that relationship says about power dynamics in a relationship based around sexism as well as racism as far as the larger society is concerned. Now, the other example we'll be using from Scandal involving the main character, Olivia Pope, has to do with her relationship with the man who becomes the president of the United States. Similarly, it is a taboo relationship, and the power dynamics are complex in that the main character, Olivia, is a black woman who is generally working behind the scenes of the president, and how that influences the roles that sex, gender, and race play, and how one is perceived and treated in the roles they play in a power-based society such as America's. So with that being said, it's important to understand what feminist critique is. So for clarity, feminist critique refers to the model of thinking or model of criticism where you analyze events but from the perspective of feminism. So in these, for example, how do I put it? So for example, in the situation studying the situations with Olivia Pope, you have to understand that the actions that motivates her or how people treat her can be understood from a feminist perspective and understanding why sexism does and doesn't occur. The way these characters that we're studying, the way they are treated by others ties directly to their identities. And a huge aspect of their identity is being African American women. And so understanding that these groups historically have faced mistreatment or disenfranchisement or lack of rights ties back to these aspects of their identity. And so the feminist critique allows you to analyze these things from a feminist perspective in order to just contextualize, analyze, and gather information from the world around us. So it's definitely a very flexible model that you can use just to understand more about the world around you, which is why it's very important to understand the feminist critique and why this critique gives you valuable insight into looking at various artifacts that are relevant in the black female experience, such as the novel and the television show Scandal. And so that brings us to the research question, which is how does race and gender impact romantic relationships between white men of power and black women? Now, there's no definite answer behind this. There is no yes, no, or to what extent. It all comes down to various shades of gray and just varying perspectives. So in the paper, in the presentation that follows, there will be some breakdowns and analysis given to understand and give a better understanding of these power dynamics, if they exist, and if so, to what extent, and in what context would they manifest, or what ways would they manifest. And so that'll give you a general overview. So throughout this presentation, in the context of how the paper was done, others afterwards will discuss Scandal in detail. They will discuss Sally Hemings in detail, and then just how these general topics relate to the overall issues within black feminism and what they mean in terms of the bigger picture, where it will later be concluded and wrapped up to summarize the main points. And so afterwards, we'll get a better understanding of feminism, power, race, gender, and how these things all tie together in determining how we are treated and how we treat others.
Sally Hemings, a novel by Barbara Chase Robound, demonstrates intersectionality by depicting the relationship between Sally Hemings, a former black slave, and Thomas Jefferson, a former white United States president. Intersectionality is defined as a study of intersection between forms or system of oppression, domination, or discrimination. The scene in the novel which provides a clear understanding of intersectionality is a section which states, "How could she have known her vision for the perfect slave would coincide with his vision for the perfect woman? And Sally Hemings loved Thomas Jefferson. That was the tragedy, love. not slavery. And God know how much slavery there was in love. This scene exemplifies how women are dominated by men without them even recognizing the system which they already have in place. What is rather perplexing is the first half of the statement, which demonstrates that the image Thomas Jefferson created for the perfect woman is nothing short of the image Sally Hemings created for the perfect slave. This statement essentially means that the perfect woman possesses all the attributes of the ideal slave, and there is where Sally Hemings is agreeing to intersectionality without even realizing there is a system in place. In reference to the second half of the statement, it confirms that Sally Hemings embraces intersectionality and essentially the true calamity isn't slavery, but in fact love. Because with love, slavery dwells in its existence. As long as there is love, slavery is not too far behind. By Sally Hemings loving and adoring Thomas Jefferson, she kept herself enslaved by him physically, mentally, and emotionally.
When looking at the relationship between power, sex, gender, and how this impacts relationships, the examples of what happens to Olivia Pope within Scandal gives a pretty good insight to this when looking at it from the feminine critique perspective. So, in Scandal, at a certain portion in the show, Olivia Pope begins to have a sexual relationship with President Fitzgerald, a white male. And so this relationship is already one that is unprofessional and shouldn't be existing in our current environment. However, you get a very good look into the complexity of power dynamics and how gender and race ties into it when you see how Olivia allows this relationship to influence her. It was Bell Hooks' I Ain't a Woman, where she makes reference to how the patriarchy and the patriarchal system is the result of men having control over women, men using power to dominate women physically and psychologically. And this becomes very evident when you look at what occurs with Olivia. Normally a very intelligent, independent woman, she becomes very caught up in this relationship to the point where she negatively lets it affect her behavior and her ability to maintain her own personal life. There was the example where Olivia and President Fitz get into a conflict and they stop talking to each other for a period of time. And during this period of time, Olivia becomes obsessed over Fitzgerald. She becomes basically attached to the idea of him. And it creates a situation where it becomes very obvious that Olivia no longer has any power or sway in this relationship. Now, why this is the case is up for debate and could be because of a variety of reasons. It could be because he's still President Fitzgerald and he has the power socially and status-wise being the President of the United States, where if anything negative were to happen, they'd both be in a negative light, but Olivia will be in a much more precarious situation in terms of how she's interpreted and treated being a black woman, where she's less likely to get the social benefit of the doubt. And it ties very heavily back into the points we mentioned about intersectionality and how intersectionality of one's identity can cause issues and inconsistencies in how you're treated. For example, Olivia being a woman, she's already likely to be the party that is frowned upon in a sexual relationship, that's a taboo relationship or inappropriate, unprofessional relationship, even though both parties are consenting and essentially at fault. A similar thing occurs when Olivia, at a certain point in her anger with Fitzgerald, she ends up throwing away her phone out of anger because she hadn't had a call with him, or she hadn't talked to him in a certain amount of time. And all of this just makes it very clear that Olivia, despite being this intelligent woman, is still in some way affected by her intersectionalized identity as a black woman, where she is often expected to be submissive, especially to this white male who is President Fitzgerald. So it gives you a good insight into how this relationship between two intelligent parties, but one being a white male in a much higher position of power, how that can have sway and influence over Olivia despite being a successful professional black woman, and how these things still tie together and influences one's identity. And this situation just gives you a good look into and a good insight into ways in which this idea of power, control, and money and such, and how it manifests and influences relationships. In this case, creating one where there's a significant power balance in which you see Olivia Pope become a victim to this man.
Conclusion, the interrelationship between a black woman and a white man of power are always going to be up as a topic of discussion. The conversation of interracial relationships have been up for question for decades. It is much more than just the race itself. It becomes an issue with intersectionality playing factors in these relationships. In the analysis between Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, combined with the relationship with Olivia Pope and President Fitzgerald from Scandal, the shift between the two cultures began to stand out. Race and gender begin to be a huge impact in these relationships. As the black woman falls in love with the white man of power, they're often being oppressed. And usually during this oppression, the women have no knowledge of what is actually occurring. This begins to make the process of them maintaining a romantic relationship with a person of power so much easier, because the person of power is getting what they want from the woman. The woman is often being drawn along, blind to the situation that's actually going on. In the story of Sally Hemings, she is consumed by intersectionality so much that she puts her own freedom on hold just so she can be with Thomas Jefferson. And in the story Scandal, Olivia, she was on her own path of being independent. But when she got that phone call from President Fitzgerald, she fell right back into the trap. In both of these scenarios, these women do not hold any type of power in their relationship. They allow their male counterparts to not only hold all of the power, but to control them with it. These oppressive situations are what make up intersectionality. The combined effect of both race and gender have been an obstacle in women's life to gain equality with white men in their relationship for many centuries. And if these women continue to let this happen and let people control them with power, and until they're able to comprehend and realize intersectionality for themselves, they will continue to be put back in these same situations and fall back in these same patterns.